Welcome to Sir Nightshade, where true horror stories are brought to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to hear more chilling tales every day. Thank you. Now let's begin. I remember it vividly. It all started early one morning, when I stepped onto a lonely trail, deep in the forests of West Virginia, down in the southern part of the state. Work, the city, the constant ringing of phones. It had all wrapped around me so tightly. I could barely breathe. I didn't just want a break. I needed this. I needed the kind of isolation only nature could offer. I parked around 9. The sun had just climbed above the trees. The sky was a pure, endless blue. Cold air filled my lungs, sharp, refreshing, like a slap that wakes you up. The first few miles passed easily. Gentle slopes, wide stretches of open forest. You could see forever between the tall trunks. Birds were chirping above me, as if trading old secrets of the woods. I remember thinking, this is perfect. It felt like I'd found the one place where I could finally disappear from the world. But that peace didn't last. By early afternoon, I came across an old fire watchtower, abandoned, rusted, half collapsed. It looked like something left behind after the world had ended. Its metal frame jutted through the canopy, stabbing into the sky. Standing there, I didn't feel awe. I felt something wrong, something off. For a second, I thought about climbing it, just to get a better view. But something in me said, don't. It wasn't fear of heights. It was the sense that if I touched it, the whole thing might crumble. It felt like a trap, waiting. And that's when I saw them, the footprints. At first, I was just lost in the scent of damp earth. The trail had been completely empty all day. No cars at the lot, no hikers passing by. So when I finally noticed the tracks, I stopped cold. They were pressed into a patch of soft mud where rainwater had pooled. At first glance, they looked like boot prints. But when I crouched down, a chill spread through my gut. They didn't make sense. The heels were too narrow, almost pinched. The toes stretched forward, unnaturally long, like something soft pulled and twisted. And worst of all, the tread pattern underneath wasn't worn. It was warped, melted, distorted, like heat had twisted it into something unnatural before it cooled again. It was something that shouldn't exist, not by any rule of physics. And the worst part? They were fresh, edges still sharp, mud still wet inside the grooves. Whoever, or whatever, made them hadn't gone far. I tried to calm myself down. I whispered under my breath, "It's just a hunter," I said, "with some kind of custom boots. Or maybe it's just the light, a trick of the angle." That's the instinct, isn't it? To explain away what terrifies you, to make it sound rational. But those thoughts were weak, empty. My mind refused to settle, so I did the only thing I could. I walked faster. The moment I picked up my pace, the forest began to change with me. Around 4 in the afternoon, I reached a fork. One trail dipped down toward a creek. The other climbed sharply up the ridge, where the map said the shelter would be. So, I started climbing. Each step grew heavier, like my backpack had somehow doubled in weight. The higher I went, the quieter the woods became. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the wrong kind. No birds, no breeze, just the crunch of my boots and the pounding of my own heartbeat behind my ribs. It felt like every living thing around me was holding its breath. And then, halfway up the slope, I stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The footprints were back. Same twisted shape. Same narrow heels and long and unnatural toes. But this time, they were right in front of me, pressed deep into the mud. I tried to follow them, searching for some kind of logic, a clue, anything. And then, they just ended. Right there, in the middle of the trail. No rock to step onto, no branch path into the brush. They simply stopped, as if whatever made them had taken 10 steps ahead of me, and then vanished into thin air. I stood there far too long, frozen in place, forcing my brain to come up with a scientific answer. But the only thought echoing in my head was cold and simple. This thing doesn't follow the rules. By the time I finally crawled up to the ridgeline, the sun was dying, painting the sky a blood-red hue. The shelter stood in a small clearing ahead, old, weathered, but still standing. Roof intact, wooden floor broad and solid, a ring of blackened stones where fires had burned before. No sign of anyone else. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt dangerously alone. I dropped my pack and went through the motions, filtered some water, cooked noodles, hung my food bag in a tree. Every task was just a way to cling to something normal. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, darkness had swallowed everything outside. I must have drifted off, because the sound hit me hard, out of nowhere. It was soft, dragging, slow, like something heavy and long was sliding along the wooden wall outside. I froze. My breathing went shallow, instinctively, as if being still might make me invisible. Something was circling the cabin, step by step. I could feel the vibrations through the wooden floor beneath my back. When it reached the far wall, the sound changed. A dry, hollow clack, 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 like bones or stones knocking together in a broken rhythm. Click, 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 pause, then silence. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something that didn't have flesh. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't turn on my flashlight right away. When the beam finally cut through the dark, I swept it across the clearing. And that's when I saw it, standing just at the edge of the light. Tall, too tall. Its body stretched thin, unnaturally lean, limbs dangling with joints that bent in ways no living creature should. Its skin was pale and tight, almost glossy, like plastic wrap stretched too far over wooden bones. It looked like a mistake, a broken sketch of what a human was supposed to be. And the head, that's what still haunts me. Narrow at the top, wider at the jaw, a mouthful of white teeth catching the beam of my light. Even though its lips didn't move, it tilted its head slowly, boldly, like a bird with a broken neck studying its prey. Then the clicking started again, but its mouth stayed closed. The sound wasn't just coming from it anymore. It was in the trees, in the ground, everywhere around me. I wasn't facing one thing anymore. I was standing inside something vast, something alive. I stepped back, slowly, carefully, feeling my way toward the backpack behind me. I never took my eyes off the thing. Every inch I moved felt like it stretched into hours. It didn't move. It just stood there, its head twitching slightly now and then, like it was studying me, analyzing, judging. This wasn't the mindless aggression of an animal. This was observation. Deliberate. Intelligent. When my hand finally brushed the strap of my pack, I grabbed it, and I ran. It wasn't strategy. It was pure, blind survival. I didn't try to find the trail again. I crashed straight into the woods, branches slapping my face, tearing at my clothes. Behind me came the chaos. Snapping wood, cracking limbs, too many for just one thing. And then, the clicking, louder, faster, until it sounded like 100 sets of teeth clattering together in the dark. The worst part was the direction. It wasn't just behind me anymore. I heard snapping to my right, clicking ahead of me. They were moving faster than I could imagine, surrounding me. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned. My legs felt hollow, like they could collapse any second. When I stumbled into a creek, I didn't hesitate. I waded in up to my knees and followed the current downstream. The icy water bit into my skin, numbing me, masking my scent, my body heat. At least, I hoped it would. I just kept moving. And then, through the trees, I saw the glint of metal, a guardrail. When I crawled up onto the asphalt, my legs almost gave out beneath me. About an hour later, an old pickup truck came down the road. The driver didn't ask much. He just stared at me through the rearview mirror while I sat shivering in the back seat, trembling like a broken machine part. He stayed quiet. And that's when it hit me. Maybe he'd seen people like me before. People the forest had spat back out. People it didn't want to keep. I never went back for my gear. Everything I left behind, that was the price I paid to stay alive. 2 days later, a park ranger called me. His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the confusion underneath. "We found your food bag," he said, still hanging high up in a tree. I asked quickly, "Thank you. What about the shelter? Did it burn down?" There was a long, uneasy silence on the other end. "It didn't burn," he said quietly. "We didn't find a shelter at all." "What do you mean?" I asked. My head started spinning. "Do you mean it collapsed, or a storm took it?" "No," he said. "There's nothing there. Just an empty patch of ground, like it was never built." I hung up, my hands shaking harder than they had that night in the woods. The shelter hadn't been destroyed. It had simply vanished. And that's when the final truth hit me, hard, like a falling stone. If something physical, something solid, like that cabin, could disappear without a trace, then where did those footprints go? When they ended halfway down the trail, I didn't escape from a creature. I escaped from an event. A tear in reality itself. Something ancient and hidden in the deep forests of West Virginia. I'd been driving since late afternoon, hours on the road, heading home from a construction site out in Virginia, back toward western Kentucky. It had been a long, brutal day, an even longer, exhausting week. All I could think about was getting home, taking a hot shower, and collapsing into my bed. I'll admit, I have always hated the interstates. They're too straight, too sterile, too predictable, like being trapped on a soulless conveyor belt of concrete. So when my GPS suggested a rural shortcut, a winding route through the mountains, I thought, why not? It promised to shave off an hour, and in my half-dead state, saving 60 minutes sounded like the best deal in the world. At first, it was everything I hoped for. Exactly what I pictured. A narrow country road curling through the hills, lined with thick trees that gave it that old, nostalgic, small-town America feel. It was almost relaxing. But the deeper I went into those mountains, the more wrong it all started to feel. The curves weren't just sharp, they were endless. One hairpin turn after another, like the road was folding in on itself, mocking me. Then came the narrowing. From a clean 2-lane road, it shrank into a cracked strip of asphalt barely wide enough for my SUV. And the worst part? No guardrails. Nothing. Just a faded white line, and beyond that, a sheer black drop into God knows where if a single tire slipped off the edge. The sun slid behind the ridges, leaving one last bruised streak of purple before the night swallowed everything. That's when I felt it, the isolation, complete and absolute. I was in the middle of nowhere. When darkness finally took over, my world shrank to two things: the tunnel of pale light from my headlights, and the faint silhouettes of trees rushing past on either side. No streetlights, no houses, no signs of life, not even a lonely mailbox to suggest anyone had ever lived here. Just mountain, road, and me. After a while, that emptiness started to crawl under my skin. You know that weird feeling, when you suddenly realize you haven't seen another car's headlights or taillights in way too long. That quiet voice whispering in your head, you're completely alone. And then I saw it. The gas gauge, hovering just below a quarter tank. Normally, that's fine. But out here, no towns, no gas stations, No phone signal, just miles of twisting darkness, pulling me deeper into nowhere. My brain went straight into panic mode. You're gonna run out of gas. You're gonna freeze. Someone's gonna find your body out here. I could practically hear my mother's voice scolding me. You should have stayed on the interstate. I told myself I needed to stop. Find somewhere safe. Stretch my legs, check the map, and plan my next move. About 5 miles later, I finally spotted a break in the trees. A small gravel pull-off, just big enough for 2 cars. It felt like a gift. I eased the SUV in, shifted into park, and killed the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, listening to the soft tick, tick, tick of the engine cooling down. The tension from the endless drive seemed to melt away. But that calm didn't last, because a creeping realization started to crawl through me. Something was wrong. I expected the quiet of the woods at night, but this wasn't quiet. This was emptiness. A hollow, dead silence, like the whole world had been vacuumed of sound. No crickets, no wind moving through the leaves, no animals, nothing. The kind of silence so complete it made your ears ring. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt lifeless. And then, through that suffocating stillness, it came a sound I'll never forget. Click. Soft but sharp. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line. At first, I told myself it was just a branch snapping. Maybe a rock tumbling down the slope. But then, click. Slower this time. Uneven, deliberate. It didn't sound random. It sounded like intent. Like claws tapping gently on a wooden floor, but missing the rhythm. Like something was trying to imitate movement, but couldn't quite get it right. I opened the car door slowly. Useless. I know. As if being careful would somehow change what was out there. The sound of my boots crunching on gravel felt deafening in the stillness. I stepped out, tried to stretch, to act normal. But my muscles were locked tight. The clicking was still there. Not closer, not farther, just there. And then came another sound, breathing, faint, but unmistakable. Long, slow inhales, followed by short, sharp exhales, like someone savoring each breath too much. I had to hold my own breath just to hear it clearly. Yeah, breathing. My fear shifted from wild animals to something worse, something human, someone out there, standing just beyond the trees, Sishas, breathing like that, and making that sick, mechanical clicking sound or samam. A wave of nausea hit me. I told myself to ignore it, just grab the phone, check the offline map, and leave. I leaned into the car, reaching for my phone on the dash. No signal, of course. I turned back toward the driver's seat, and that's when I saw them. The eyes, they didn't glow, but they caught the cabin light just enough to glint like 2 tarnished coins in the dark. At first, they were low, too low for a person, but then they started to rise. Not a jump, not a lunge, just a slow, steady lift, like something unfolding. And then it stepped out from between the trees. I swear, I still can't describe it right. It was tall, at least 7 feet, but everything about its limbs was wrong. Too long, too thin. The joints bent in ways no human body should. Every movement was deliberate, rehearsed, like it had seen someone walk before and was trying to mimic it, without understanding how. Its head tilted in short, twitchy jerks, like a bird sizing up prey. And the face, God, it was almost human, almost, like someone had tried to paint a face from memory and got every detail slightly wrong. Eyes too far apart, mouth stretched too wide, features scrambled into something off. That uncanny, gut-turning wrongness hit me like a wall. The kind of horror that lives in the uncanny valley, where something familiar becomes absolutely terrifying. I froze, every muscle locked. My mind was screaming, "Move, move," but my body refused. And then, it opened its mouth, but it didn't speak in its own voice. It used mine, same tone, same pitch, same tired rasp. And it said just one word: "Run!" I don't even remember deciding to move. That sound, my own voice, coming from something that shouldn't exist, shattered whatever ice had frozen my body. Instinct took over. I dove into the SUV so fast, my shoulder slammed into the doorframe. In my panic, the keys slipped from my hand and hit the floor mat with a dull thud. As I dropped to my knees, fingers fumbling blindly in the dark for that one piece of metal that meant life or death, the clicking came back. But this time, it wasn't slow. It was fast, violent. It wasn't in the trees anymore. It was circling the SUV. I could hear gravel being torn and crushed beneath something moving with impossible speed. That scraping, clicking rhythm darted from one side of the car to the other. Click, 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 click. Too fast, too smooth. No creature that size should move like that. Panic sharpened into pure, blinding focus. My fingers found the keys, shaking, but steady. I jammed them into the ignition and turned with every ounce of strength I had left. The engine roared to life, the loudest and most beautiful sound I've ever heard. I slammed the shifter into drive and floored it. Tires screamed, gravel exploded, and the SUV fishtailed violently before gripping the cracked asphalt and shooting forward into the night. In the rearview mirror, for just a split second, I saw it, still standing in that gravel lot, watching me leave. Its head tilted at that same unnatural angle. Those long, dead arms dangling like broken branches. It didn't chase me. It let me go. And somehow, that was worse. I didn't dare slow down. Didn't dare look back again. My hands were welded to the steering wheel. My foot pressed flat on the gas, racing against both the falling fuel gauge and the rising panic clawing at my chest. Every curve felt like a near-death experience, tires screeching, headlights slicing through the dark like a desperate lifeline. After what must have been 40 miles, though it felt like an entire lifetime, I finally saw light. The warm, faded glow of a diner sign flickering at the edge of the road. I swerved into the parking lot, braking so hard I nearly hit a trash bin. I didn't turn off the engine. I didn't get out. I just sat there, shaking uncontrollably, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached, staring into that endless stretch of black road behind me. The road I'd somehow escaped. And even now, I still wonder, what did it mean? Run! Was it a warning, a threat, or just a cruel joke from something that had stolen my voice? My uncle owned a hunting cabin, the kind that sits so deep in the woods. It might as well be on another planet. They call it Appalachia, but where that cabin stands, it goes beyond what most people picture when they hear the middle of nowhere. This was the kind of wilderness that swallows you whole. No GPS, no cell service. 3 hours to the nearest town, 2 to the nearest gas station. And surrounding that little cabin was nothing but forest. Old, moss-covered trees that felt ancient, like they'd been standing there long before time itself had a name. When I called my uncle to ask if I could spend the weekend there, he hesitated, just for a moment, but long enough for me to notice. Then he said, "Sure, go ahead, but don't expect much. It's rough out there." There was something caught in his throat when he spoke, like he was holding back something important. I laughed it off, trying to keep it light. "Anything special I should know before I go?" "Yeah," he said. His voice dropped lower, flat, almost lifeless. "Make sure you shut off the generator at night. It leaks fuel sometimes." I joked back, "Got it. No fireworks, no explosions. Anything else?" This time, there was silence. A long one. So long that I actually pulled the phone away to check if the call had dropped. Then he whispered, "Don't ever wander after dark. You'll lose your sense of direction out there." That was it. No story, no reason why, just that cold, bare warning. And somehow, it stayed with me for the entire drive up into the mountains, like a thorn in the back of my mind. The road up there felt endless, switchback after switchback, twisting around the slopes like a giant serpent. The ridgelines grew darker, fading into the bruised colors of dusk. By the time I turned onto the dirt road, the sun was gone. My truck rattled over potholes and loose gravel, the sound echoing through the trees that leaned so close they nearly brushed the sides of the vehicle. The headlights caught their shadows, wild, chaotic shapes that danced across the windshield like they were alive. At some point, it stopped feeling like a road at all. It felt like I was tunneling straight into the forest's throat. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, just a crooked little box of wood, its porch sagging like it might slide right off the foundation. The steps groaned under my weight, and when I pushed open the heavy door, a smell hit me, old pine dust, mixed with something metallic and damp, like rusted nails forgotten in a toolbox. Inside, it was bare bones. A single bedroom, a kitchen with a hand pump, and a living room with a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't seen a flame in decades. The silence inside wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy enough to touch. I tossed my bag down, made a quick dinner on the propane stove, and sat on the porch until the last trace of light vanished. Out here, darkness doesn't fall gently. It drops like a trapdoor. One moment, the mountains were visible silhouettes. The next, they were gone, consumed by a black so complete it felt alive. I locked the door, turned off the lanterns, and unrolled my sleeping bag on the old couch. For a long while, I just stared up at the ceiling, listening to the faint ringing in my ears, because that was the only living sound left in a cabin completely surrounded by silence. Sleep didn't come easy. I drifted off for a moment, only to jolt awake, heart pounding like a drum. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was the old wood of the cabin settling. I told myself that, over and over, trying to keep my brain tethered to logic. This ancient forest could make 1,000 strange noises, but they all had explanations. At least, that's what I kept telling myself, until I heard the scratching. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me out of the fog. A slow drag, rough, deliberate, like something heavy was moving along the outer wall of the cabin. I froze instantly, every muscle locked, trembling. My mind scrambled for an answer, a branch in the wind, maybe a raccoon, anything that made sense. But this sound, dianya, didn't feel random much. Then it came again, longer this time, slower. Scratch, pause, scratch. It had rhythm, purpose. Like someone was tracing their fingers, or something sharp, along the wooden walls, feeling their way across the grain. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. I slipped quietly out of the sleeping bag. My bare feet touched the icy floorboards. The small axe I'd used earlier leaned against the wall. My hand reached for it before I even thought about it, as if my body already knew what it had to do. Then, it came again, closer this time, right outside the kitchen window. And with it, a sound I wished to God I could forget. A breath, long, wet, dragging across the wood, as if something out there was savoring the feel of the rough surface beneath its nose. A wave of primal disgust washed over me. Every instinct screamed, "Don't make a sound." I crept toward the kitchen. The floorboards groaned beneath me, each creak echoing in the silence like a gunshot. My fingers trembled as I reached for the curtain. I lifted it. Just a crack, just enough to see. Nothing. Nothing but black. A pure, suffocating black you couldn't see through. My pale face reflected faintly in the glass. Behind it, darkness layered on darkness. The kind of dark your eyes force into shapes. Just to stay sane. And then, I swear, something moved. Not a clear shape, but the sense of movement. Like the darkness itself had taken a step closer. The scratching stopped. Silence returned. Heavier, thicker, almost alive. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured. It wasn't running. It was walking, circling the cabin. I stepped back, breath shallow. The axe raised, ready. The footsteps faded, then vanished completely. 1 minute, 2, 3, 5. Nothing but the creak of old timber, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. I didn't dare try to sleep again. I sat there, back against the couch, the axe across my knees, eyes fixed on the door and window, through a night that felt like it would never end. When the first streaks of gray slipped through the cabin window, bringing the faintest touch of dawn, that was the first time I felt like I could breathe again. I waited until the light grew strong enough to chase away the ghosts the night had painted. Then I stepped outside. The ground was slick with dew, the air so cold it ached in my chest. And that's when I saw them. The tracks. They weren't boot prints. They weren't bear, deer, or anything I could recognize. They formed a perfect line straight from the porch, across the yard, and into the trees. Each print pressed deep into the mud, deep enough to hold water, and each one split down the middle, as if two sharp hooks had clawed their way through. The weight behind them wasn't natural. It was wrong, unbalanced, alien. Every fragile explanation I'd been clinging to shattered in an instant. I followed them. God help me. I knew I shouldn't have, but I had to know. The trail stretched maybe 30, 40 yards, weaving through pine and brush. The steps were calm, unhurried, deliberate, and then, right in the middle of a clearing, they just stopped. No scuff marks, no broken branches. The footprints ended abruptly, swallowed by nothing, as if whatever made them had simply stepped out of existence. Something inside me broke then, a final, irreversible understanding. This thing didn't belong to the natural world. I turned and ran. I packed everything in a blur. I remember the sound of zippers, the thud of gear hitting the truck bed, and nothing else. I didn't wash the dishes. I didn't leave a note. I just left. When the truck roared to life, it wasn't just an engine starting. It was freedom screaming through steel. The road back was a blur of gravel and blind turns. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I'd made it out, that it was over. And I almost believed it, until the last bend before the highway. That's where I saw it. Standing at the tree line, watching me. Its skin was pale, stretched thin enough to reveal blue veins and twisted bones beneath, like something assembled from a crumpled sketch that someone had tried to flatten out again. Its arms were too long, its hands dragging through the dirt, leaving thin grooves behind. And its head, dear God, its head tilted slowly as my truck sped past. The jaw began to open, wider and wider, until I swore the whole face would split apart. A black void stared back at me, empty, endless. I didn't stop. I didn't even ease off the gas. I just drove, and I never looked back at Appalachia again. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the definition of a burned-out man in the 21st century. If you've ever worked in a place where the digital noise never stops, Wall Street, some overhyped startup, you'll understand. My brain stopped feeling like a living organ a long time ago. It's more like a cracked speaker now, endlessly buzzing and pinging with nameless obligations. For 6 straight months, I existed in this half-awake state. Not really alive, not really dead, so I decided to give myself a long weekend. Not the beach, not parties. I didn't want pleasure. I wanted nothingness. I needed mountains, a tent, a quiet trail, something that would let the wet sponge in my skull finally deflate. I needed trees and absolute silence. I picked a trail called Ridgeway Loop, found it buried deep in an old hiking forum. It was described as moderate, with decent viewpoints. But what sealed the deal was this line: rarely traveled. That was all I needed to hear. I craved solitude so badly, I was willing to pay whatever price it asked. I wasn't in the mood to make small talk with some stranger wearing designer hiking gear. I loaded up my old Jeep before sunrise and drove for 5 hours straight. The further I went, the smaller the towns became. The roads narrowed until they were little more than threads of asphalt clinging to the hillsides, and eventually, it was just me and the rolling green waves of Appalachia, endless, ancient, and alive. I could actually feel the first knot of tension unravel from my shoulders. When I finally reached the trailhead, the parking lot was completely empty, not a single car. Normally, that kind of isolation might have made me uneasy, because in every movie, solitude means danger. But that morning, it felt like a gift. I parked, stretched until my spine popped, double-checked the map, and slung my pack over my shoulder. The air hit me like a quiet punch, cold, clean, sharp, as if it had never been breathed by another human being. For the first time in months, my mind went completely blank. I wasn't thinking about deadlines or clients. I was just there, standing in something vast and beautiful. The first few miles were a promise. The trail wound through tall spruce trees, their trunks rising like pillars of some forgotten temple. The ground was padded with a thick layer of fallen leaves, each step releasing a soft, delicate crunch. Just enough to remind me I was real, but not enough to disturb the peace. By noon, I stumbled upon a small stream. The water was impossibly clear, so clear it almost looked artificial, like someone had drawn it. I decided that would be my spot. I set up my tent, fired up my little gas stove, and boiled a packet of noodles. Then I sat on a flat rock and ate, listening to the gentle whisper of water sliding over stones. No car horns, no voices, no server hums or message alerts, just quiet. But it wasn't an absence of sound. It was the presence of silence, dense, ancient, and heavy enough to press against your eardrums. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. That night, I built a small fire and stared into the flames until the stars began to flicker overhead. It felt perfect, primitive, like life had finally shrunk down to something I could actually hold in my hands. I could have sworn I heard something, a sharp crack, far off in the darkness around midnight, but I told myself it was just a branch snapping. When my eyelids grew heavy, I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and let the forest swallow me whole. The next morning, I woke up early, not because of an alarm, but because of the air. It had that sharp mountain chill, the kind that makes you feel alive in a way that almost hurts. I grabbed my light pack, just some water and a few energy bars, and decided to climb higher, to find the lookout point marked on the map. The incline was steeper than I'd expected, but my body was humming. My lungs burned in a good way, the kind of burn that reminds you you're still human. It felt so damn satisfying. I forgot everything else for a while, until the trail markers disappeared. I'm an experienced hiker. I know how to read terrain. At first, I thought I'd just missed an orange blaze somewhere. No big deal. I backtracked a few steps, scanning the trees. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Trails don't just end, right? The dirt path under my boots was still worn and clear enough, so I trusted it for a little too long. Then I stopped, pulled out my map and compass, and my heart dropped. The compass needle was twitching in lazy circles, and the path beneath me didn't match anything on the map. I was lost, in a way that didn't make sense. That's when things started to feel off. The first thing I noticed was a rope. Old, frayed, hanging from a tree branch. The fibers were blackened, not from weather, but from heat. The wood above it was scorched in a perfect circle, too clean, too sharp, like it had been burned by something focused and impossibly hot, not a spreading fires. And then came the smell, not smoke, but ozone and burnt hair. I stared at it far too long, trying to force my tired brain to make sense of it. What the hell could make a burn that precise out here? I kept walking, but slower now, cautious. Then came the bones, scattered across the damp earth, pale as chalk. Not a full skeleton, just fragments. A rib here. Something that looked like a femur there. My brain jumped to the easiest explanation. Deer bones? Gotta be. We're in the woods, after all. But that femur, it was too long, too stretched, bent at an angle that made no sense. It didn't look broken. It looked pulled, as if it had been softened and twisted before it hardened again. And they were picked clean. Too clean. No sinew, no flesh, nothing. Then, the silence changed. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I'd fallen in love with the day before. It had weight now, pressing against my eardrums. It felt like stepping into a room where someone had just been hiding a second before you entered. A silence that was waiting. Even the sound of my own footsteps felt wrong. Too loud, too sharp, like they didn't belong here. That's when I decided, enough. I'd seen more than enough. I was turning back, but when I turned around, nothing behind me looked familiar. The slope was steeper, the trees closer, leaning in, crowding together, as if the forest itself was tightening its grip. The rope was gone. The bones were gone. Everything looked distorted, darker, hostile. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not an animal. Breathing, slow, deliberate. A deep inhale, dragging air in like syrup. And then an exhale, wet, ragged, scraping against something rough inside. I froze. Every muscle locked. It came again, closer this time. And then something else. A low, broken mumble. Not words I could recognize. Just warped sounds. As if something was trying to mimic human speech, but didn't understand the meaning behind the noises. Like a parrot with a throat full of mud, my skin went cold. Every instinct screamed run, but I couldn't move. Not until I heard the third sound, the final one. Wood creaking, loud, heavy, like something enormous was shifting its weight, pressing down against a tree. That creaking sound, that was the breaking point. The final warning I couldn't ignore. I knew, deep down, it wasn't an animal. It had weight, and something deliberate, almost intelligent in the way it moved. I ran. I didn't care about the branches whipping against my skin, or the straps of my pack digging into my shoulders. My lungs ignited instantly. I ran without thinking, not caring if I was still on the trail or not, just pushing through the brush, downhill, desperate to get out of whatever was watching me. I stumbled into my campsite, my blue tarp still there, untouched. I lunged for my main pack with shaking hands. Didn't even spare a second to put out the tiny fire still hissing beside the stones. I threw the straps over my shoulders and sprinted down the slope, feeling the entire forest folding in behind me, collapsing inward. The stupid thought of leaving my gear behind flickered once, but I knew if I stayed 30 seconds longer, I'd never make it out. That's when I made the classic horror movie mistake. I looked back. Up on the ridge, between two trees, stood a shape. It was tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the lower branches above it. Its arms hung past its knees, long, thin, stretched like the bones I'd seen earlier, as if someone had pulled them taut. Its skin was the color of wet bark, and it wasn't standing among the trees. It was emerging from them, peeling itself away from the forest, revealing what it really was. Then the head tilted, not a smooth human motion, but a sharp, dry crack, like someone snapping an old branch. It tilted too far, like a dog straining to catch a sound too high for human ears. And then, its mouth opened. No growl, no roar, just my name, drawn out, broken, as if the sound had been crushed, forced through a rusted pipe. Yeah! But the voice wasn't coming just from it. It came from everywhere, bouncing between the trees, distorted and echoing, like it had heard me whisper my name to myself while pitching my tent last night, and had recorded it. Now it was playing it back, through a broken speaker. A mockery. Cruel, wrong. The rest is a blur. Flashes of green light. The metallic taste of blood as I bit my tongue. The pounding of my skull as I crashed through the underbrush. I didn't stop, not once. I ran until the dense forest finally spat me out onto a rough gravel road. When I stumbled into the ranger station, I was barely standing, clothes torn, face streaked with blood and dirt. They looked at me, horrified. They told me I'd somehow wandered 7 miles off any marked trail. 7 miles? Across a ravine and a rock face I couldn't have possibly climbed in just a few hours. They asked if I'd run into a bear, or maybe a mountain lion. I just shook my head. I didn't tell them what I'd seen, because there aren't words for something that wrong. I got in my Jeep and drove. Didn't stop until those mountains were nothing but a faint, harmless smear in the rearview mirror. I swore I'd never hike alone again. But sometimes, when the night gets too quiet and the air feels heavy, I can still hear it. That wet, rasping breath, and that broken voice still trying to learn how to say my name just right. I'd walked that trail more times than I could count, but never this far. And most importantly, never in winter. The cold didn't just numb your skin, it changed the very nature of the forest itself. Winter here stripped everything bare, left it raw and unforgiving. The trees stood like skeletons, their branches, thin and black, stretched upward like clawed fingers scraping at the heavy gray sky. Beneath my boots, the ground felt soft and damp, a sponge of decaying leaves layered from months of rot. I started around 10 a.m., confident I'd reach the overlook by noon, eat a quick lunch, and be back before the sun disappeared completely. 12 miles round trip, 6 up, 6 down. Easy. I'd done tougher hikes before. That sense of familiarity, and a bit of arrogance, should have been my first warning. I thought I knew this forest like the back of my hand. About 2 hours in, deep within the heart of the woods, I noticed something strange. The silence. Not the usual quiet of an empty forest. This was absolute. 1 minute. There were still the comforting sounds, the snap of a branch, the rhythmic tap of a woodpecker, the faint whisper of wind brushing through the pines. And then, nothing. It was as if someone had pulled down a thick velvet curtain, soundproof, heavy, or worse, flipped a switch that turned the world off. It didn't hit me all at once. The realization seeped in slowly, like cold water into bone. I kept walking for a few more minutes, trying to rationalize it, until that wrongness began to crawl under my skin. I stopped, completely still. My breath turned into pale mist, curling and vanishing into the frozen air. I listened. No birds, no insects, no whisper of wind through branches, not even the distant groan of trees shifting under their own weight. Just 2 sounds remained, the crunch of my boots against the frozen earth, and the pounding of my heart, suddenly deafening in my chest. I tried to reason with myself. It's winter. Animals hide. Birds shelter. The forest should be quiet. Sure, that made sense. But the way it happened, that instantaneous cut-off, it wasn't natural. It felt deliberate. In countless old mountain folk tales, they say when the forest falls silent for no reason, it means something unnatural is nearby. And I could feel it, that creeping, hollow cold that didn't come from the air, but from the presence of something else closing in. The trail began to narrow, dangerously so. It hugged the side of a steep cliff, The kind where one careless misstep could send you tumbling a dozen meters down into a bed of jagged rocks below. To my left was a sheer wall of stone, cold and glazed with a thin layer of ice that caught the dim light like glass. Every frozen droplet shimmered faintly, turning the wall into a massive, deadly mirror. To my right was nothing but open air. A drop so deep it made my stomach twist just to glance at it. I forced myself to focus, eyes locked on the narrow path ahead, counting each step like a child trying to cross a balance beam. That focus was the only thing keeping my mind from fracturing under the weight of the silence, that awful, smothering stillness. Then, up ahead, as something dark stood out against the pale earth. At first, I thought it was a scrap of torn fabric, maybe from someone's pack or jacket. People lose all kinds of things out here. But when I got closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't fabric, it was hair. A thick, coarse clump of black hair, matted together with something dark and crusted that definitely wasn't mud. Each strand was fused to the next, not shed naturally, but ripped out, torn violently from wherever it came. I crouched down, careful not to touch it, just staring. The hair itself wasn't what unnerved me most. It was the wrongness of it, too much for a rodent, too rough to belong to a deer or bear, definitely not any kind of wildlife that shed in winter. The first thought that crossed my mind was a dog. Maybe someone's hunting dog got lost. But there was no blood, no paw prints, no sign of a struggle. Just that clump of hair, sitting there alone, like a warning, left deliberately in the middle of the path. I should have turned back right then. Every primal instinct, every horror story I'd ever heard screamed at me to leave. But I didn't. I kept walking. Why? Maybe because my survival instincts were as strong as wet tissue paper. Or maybe because, deep down, the thought of walking back into that silent forest felt worse than whatever was waiting ahead. About half a mile later, I found something else. Something pale. It was leaning against a fallen log, and from a distance, I mistook it for a broken branch. But as I got closer, my blood froze. It was a bone, long, smooth, and wrong. Too thin to be from a deer's leg, too clean to be a random animal remnant. Both ends were worn down, rounded and polished, as if it had been handled, used, over a long period of time. And then I saw the footprints. They were pressed into a patch of damp soil that hadn't yet frozen over, human-sized, but completely barefoot. And they weren't right. The toes curled inward, sharp and hooked like claws. The arch of the foot rose unnaturally high, distorted. Whoever, or whatever, made them didn't walk like a person. The print suggested something that gripped the earth when it moved, like it crawled rather than stepped. That's when the voice in my head stopped whispering and started screaming. This isn't strange anymore. This is dangerous. Get the hell out of here. For a split second, I almost did. I turned halfway around, but then I felt it, that invisible pressure in the air. The silence had weight, pushing at my back, hurting me forward. It felt like a rule I didn't understand, one that said, don't turn around. Because if I did, something would be standing there, waiting. So I kept walking. The trail finally ended. I'd made it. The overlook. No more path ahead. Just a sheer drop, a cliff edge that looked out over miles of rolling mountains, stretching endlessly like a gray-green ocean beneath a pale, unmoving sky. I should have felt relief, a sense of victory, maybe even peace. But instead, I felt exposed. Completely and utterly exposed. It was like standing alone on a massive stage, every unseen eye fixed on me, or like being the lone offering in the middle of a field, waiting for lightning to strike. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was trapped. Then I heard it. From behind me, from the tree line, not footsteps, a dragging sound. Something long, heavy, sliding over the dead leaves with a slow, wet scrape. Then silence, a pause, waiting, and then that same dragging sound again, much, much closer. I turned around. It was standing at the edge of the forest. The dim winter light was just enough for me to make out its shape. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it, to label it human. It was hunched, its long arms dangling low enough to almost brush the ground. But the moment it moved, just slightly, every part of my body screamed that something was horribly wrong. Nothing about that shape was right. Too thin, too long. Its skin looked wrong. Not pale like a person's, but a sickly, stretched hide, grayish, waterlogged, like leather soaked and dried too fast, pulled tight in all the wrong places. And the head? God! The head didn't belong to the body. Too large, too heavy. It drooped forward, like the frail neck beneath it couldn't possibly bear its weight. It didn't move quickly. It just stood there, its spine bending and unbending in slow, awful arches, like it had too many joints, each one twisting unnaturally with every breath. And then came the sound. That sound. A wet, rhythmic clicking, steady, deliberate, like teeth chattering together, but without lips to muffle them. It was the sound of hunger. Impatient, eager. I found myself stepping backward toward the cliff without realizing it. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Run! Run now!" But my legs wouldn't move. My breathing came in sharp, shallow gasps, the kind that hurt. The thing tilted its head, slowly, curiously, as if it were trying to peer through me, to see what I looked like on the inside. Then it dropped, completely, flat to the ground, so fast it looked like gravity had slammed it down. And it started to crawl. Not like a person. Not like any animal I'd ever seen. Its limbs twisted in directions that shouldn't exist. Bones cracked. Pop, 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 loud enough to echo off the stone around me. The clicking didn't stop. It grew faster, sharper, closer. That was the moment something in me snapped. I turned, and I ran. I don't remember the first 100 feet. Just a blur of trees whipping past, boots slipping over ice and dead leaves. Every time I stumbled, I felt it, right behind me, close enough to grab my ankle. I never heard footsteps, only that scraping, dragging sound, and the clicks. Click, click, click. Faster, louder, closer. I veered off the trail twice, crashed through bushes, tore my hands open on sharp rock, and still kept running. My lungs burned so bad I could taste blood. My vision tunneled until all I could see were streaks of motion and shadows that moved when they shouldn't. But I didn't stop. Not once. Not until I saw it, the glint of metal through the trees. My truck. I sprinted toward it so hard I slammed the door against myself, trying to get in. Fell inside, shut the door. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key into the ignition. And just as the engine roared to life, I heard one last click. Right behind me, so close I could feel it. I didn't look in the mirror. I threw it in gear and tore down that dirt road Zionjuas, the steering wheel jerking beneath my hands. I didn't care. I just drove. And from that day on, I've never gone back to that mountain. I grew up and spent my whole life in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Out here, you don't need Google Maps. The back roads and winding trails are the lifeblood of this place. It's an unspoken rule. You learn the shortcuts long before you ever bother remembering the names of the highways. My father, a quiet man, but full of strange wisdom, used to say, "The mountains have their own laws." He said those ridges know how to keep their secrets for 1,000 years. If you're sharp enough to notice them. I never thought much about that. Not until that night, The night I realized the mountains themselves had decided to keep me, like something that didn't quite belong anywhere else. It was a late Sunday afternoon in late March, just before the sun dipped below the ridgeline. That kind of weary, heavy afternoon that carries the weight of the weekend, when you've done everything you planned, yet somehow still feel unfinished. I had just left my cousin's place after helping him split firewood. He lives so far out, it almost feels unreal. Past the last stretch of pavement, where the mailbox is nailed to an old oak tree, and the road ahead becomes more of a suggestion than a path. The shortcut home from there was an old logging road, snaking through 20 miles of deep woods before finally dropping me near town. I'd driven it countless times. It wasn't smooth, filled with ruts, mud holes, and places where I had to ride the truck through puddles. But it saved me nearly half an hour. Besides, I always liked the silence out there. That kind of stillness that makes you feel protected. But that day, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. A spring storm had passed through earlier, brief but violent, bringing with it screaming winds and sheets of rain. Now everything was soaked, painted in a dull, lifeless gray. The world outside my truck looked like it had been washed clean of color. No birds, no insects, nothing. Only the sound of my tires hissing and squelching through the mud as I crept forward down that narrow trail. The solitude that used to calm me had turned into something else entirely, a quiet tension that crawled beneath my skin. And as I drove deeper into the woods, the old stories people whispered about the wanderers, those who never sleep in the hollows, suddenly didn't feel like stories anymore. They felt real. Too real. About 6 miles deeper into the woods, my truck jolted to an abrupt stop. A massive tree, I think it was a poplar, had fallen straight across the road. It lay there like someone had placed it on purpose, blocking my only way out. Its roots were ripped from the earth, jutting into the air like a handful of angry claws. I killed the engine. The silence that followed made the forest feel even more suffocating. Stepping out, I circled around to see if I could move it somehow. That's when the cold hit me. A sudden, biting chill that sank straight into my bones. The entire underside of the trunk had been stripped bare. Not torn, not scraped, stripped. Smooth, unnaturally smooth, as if something had shaved it clean. Then I looked down at the roots. They weren't broken or splintered. They'd been chewed through. Deep grooves spiraled around each root, like twin blades had corkscrewed through the wood. The bites were huge, big enough for me to slide my fingers inside if I were insane enough to try. Right then, logic stopped working. Too big for a beaver, too strange for a bear. Whatever did this wasn't bound by anything I knew from the natural world. The longer I stared, the stronger that primal chill crept up the back of my neck. That fallen tree wasn't just an obstacle. It was a warning, carved deep into the wood. I hurried back to the truck, grabbed my phone, hoping to call my cousin to bring his chainsaw. But the screen just flashed one thing: no service. Not a single bar, not even a flicker of hope. The isolation I used to love now felt like a prison. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to decide, drive 20 miles back through the mud and fading light, or face down a damn tree heavier than my truck. That's when I heard it. A sound, metal scraping against stone. But it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from underneath my truck. Every muscle in my body froze. The keys were still in my hand. The engine wasn't even running. Slowly, I cracked the door open, leaned down, and looked beneath. Nothing. Just mud and dead leaves clinging to the frame. I exhaled, forcing a nervous laugh. Probably just a rock shifting loose when the truck bounced. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and that's when I saw it. Movement. A flicker between the trees. Not a deer, not any animal I recognized. It was pale, unnaturally pale, gliding low to the ground, so fast it barely seemed to touch it. I only caught a glimpse, a blur of white cutting through the dark, before it vanished into the tree line. But that single glimpse was enough to twist my gut into knots. It moved like a torn scrap of paper caught in the wind. But there was something deliberate about it, something alive, something wrong. And every nerve in my body screamed the same word: run. I scrambled back into the truck and slammed the lock down. Pure instinct. My heart was pounding so violently that the sound filled my ears, drowning out my own ragged breathing. The forest outside had fallen into complete, suffocating silence. No wind, no dripping water, nothing. And that stillness was worse than any scream could ever be. Then it came back, the scratching. But this time, it wasn't coming from under the truck. It was on the bed, above me. Slow, deliberate drags, metal against metal, like claws raking across steel. A sickening chill climbed my spine. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I stared into the rear window, my breath fogging the glass. Nothing, only gray trees, and my own terrified reflection staring back. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of the nerves, the mind unraveling after the storm. And then, a crash. The bed slammed shut behind me, a heavy, solid thud, like something massive had dropped from the sky onto the back of the truck. The whole vehicle lurched forward. That was it. My brain stopped thinking. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I jammed the key in the ignition, twisted hard, and the engine roared to life like salvation itself. I floored it. The tires spun wildly in the mud, then finally caught traction, and I tore down that trail like a madman. Branches whipped against the mirrors. Mud exploded up the sides. Half a mile later, I made one fatal mistake. I looked into the rearview mirror. It was there, in the middle of the road. No more crawling, no more gliding. It was running, standing upright, but wrong. So wrong. Its shoulders hunched forward like broken wings. Arms so long they nearly scraped the ground even as it sprinted. Its head dangled low, jaw swinging open far too wide, as if the bones had come loose. That skin, so pale it almost glowed in the fading light. And its eyes, two black pits that swallowed everything. I slammed the gas harder. The truck fishtailed, nearly clipping a tree, but I didn't care. I didn't slow down until the forest broke open and I felt the tires grip solid asphalt again. I didn't stop for 10 straight miles. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking so badly I had to use both of them just to turn the key. I stepped out, walked to the back of the truck, and froze. The tailgate was crushed inward, deep spiral grooves carved into the metal, so sharp they could have sliced a finger clean off. I drove straight to my cousin's place, told him everything, stumbling over my words, barely able to breathe. I sold that truck the following week. Didn't care about the price. Didn't care who bought it. Never looked back. And I never took that logging road again. Because the price of curiosity was more than just a truck. It was my peace of mind forever. My job, inspecting power lines, has dragged on for 6 long years. It's not glamorous work. It's long drives through nowhere, thick coffee gulped down in gas station parking lots, and endless hours spent in places where you could walk for miles and never see another soul. If you've never been out here, deep inside the Appalachian range, you can't truly understand the kind of isolation that seeps into your bones. Out here, it feels like the mountains fold in on themselves, swallowing everything whole. The old asphalt roads, if you can even call them that, are nothing but faded scars now, slowly erased by mud, moss, and time. In some areas, your GPS dies before you even make the first turn, and from that moment on, you're completely alone. The world narrows to mud, gravel, and trees, massive trees leaning into each other, as if they're too tired to let you pass. Last fall, I got a work order to check out a power outage up on Mill Branch Ridge. That name, you won't find it on any map. outside of a handful of locals, hunters, loggers, people who've lived here all their lives. No one even knows it exists. They know it's there, but they don't talk about it much. And when they do, it's always with a warning. Don't drive up there after dark. At first, I thought it was about potholes. Or maybe one of those backwoods meth labs people whisper about. But there was always something else in their voices. A kind of cold restraint, like they were holding back a truth too heavy to put into words. Something older and darker. Dispatch said the outage came after a big storm, probably a broken insulator or a tree limb across the line. Routine stuff. I loaded the gear, checked everything twice, a habit that's kept me alive more than once, and rolled out before sunrise, trying to beat the morning fog. The first hour went smooth. Paved road, a few gas stations flickering in the distance, the same stray dogs chasing my truck for sport. But the deeper I drove, the emptier it got. The last house I passed was a 2-story cabin perched on stilts beside a muddy creek. It looked like something straight out of a horror story. Windows black, curtains gone, no sign of life. The mailbox hung bent and crooked, like it had given up. Beyond that point, the pavement ended. And so did everything else. No signal. No houses, no signs. Just the forest, gray. Skeletal trees clawing at the sky, arching so tight over the road it felt like I was driving through the ribs of some ancient dead beast. Eventually, I reached the service gate. Nothing but a rusted chain looped through the 2 rotten wooden posts. It looked like it had been standing there since before electricity existed. The padlock was rusted solid. It took everything I had to get it loose. By company policy, I was supposed to log the time, location, and conditions before leaving the main road. I pulled out my phone. No bars, no signal, no surprise. I decided to keep going. The truck's tires slipped in deep ruts carved by the last storm. The maintenance road was barely wide enough for the vehicle itself. The trees on both sides pressed close, closing in behind me like they were erasing the path I came from. The only sound was the engine groaning and branches scraping against the mirrors, like long fingernails dragging across metal. After about 2 miles, I hit a slope too steep to climb safely, so I parked on a flat stretch, grabbed my safety vest, and started walking the line, 1 pole at a time. The first few poles went by without a hitch. The braces were steady, no loose bolts, no scorch marks. Honestly, I started to wonder if the storm had even caused any damage out here at all. Everything was so uneventful, it almost felt reassuring, until I reached pole 117, and that's where I knew, without a doubt, that something was fundamentally wrong. The ground there wasn't just wet. It was black, completely black. Not the dark brown of rain-soaked soil, but a deep, oily black, thick and heavy, as if oil had spilled and mixed into the earth, forming a perfect circle around the base of the pole. It shimmered unnaturally under the pale daylight, slick and dense, as if it had its own gravity. It didn't spread or pool like liquid. It simply sank, as though the ground beneath had rotted from the inside, no longer able to hold life. And right in the center of that blackened soil was something pale. At first, I thought it was just a piece of rotted bark, or maybe an animal bone washed up by the storm. Part of me wanted to believe that, but when I crouched down and brushed away the thick layer of mud, I froze. It wasn't bone. It looked like skin, gray-white, wrinkled, stretched thin like parchment, wrapped tightly around something with ridged, fibrous lines beneath. Maybe tendons or connective tissue. I was still staring at it, trying to make sense of it logically, when it twitched. Just a ripple, a tiny, involuntary contraction, like a muscle flexing beneath the surface. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell into that black pit. My first thought was that I'd disturbed some dying animal. But then, I heard it. A sound I swear I can still feel in my teeth when I remember it. Not a growl, not labored breathing, but a click, wet, deliberate, and slow, like someone pressing their tongue hard against the roof of their mouth. Only, it didn't sound right. It was too hollow, too deep, like it came from a throat that wasn't made to produce sound at all. I swung my flashlight toward the tree line, where the forest began to fade into shadow. At first, nothing. Just a blur of gray trunks fading into darkness. Then, something moved, low to the ground, sliding between two trees like a thick, drifting smoke, before slowly pulling itself upright. God help me. That was the moment I knew I should have turned around and run. It stood on two legs, but that's where any resemblance to a person ended. It was tall, unnaturally tall, thin to the point of sickness. Its arms dangling so low that the hooked fingers nearly brushed its knees. The skin was that same gray-white, slick and hairless, exactly like the piece I'd just touched in the mud. Where its eyes should have been were deep, hollow pits. Not empty, exactly, but darker than the skin around them, as if light itself was swallowed the moment it touched. And its mouth, that mouth, it didn't just open, it split. The upper and lower jaws peeled apart on both sides, cracking wide open like someone splitting a log with an axe, until its entire head seemed to come undone. It opened so far that inside was nothing but a horrifying, empty void. I started backing up, slow at first, then faster, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But my brain was locked, fixated on keeping that flashlight trained on it. The black sludge clung to my boots, coating them in a glossy, oil-like sheen. And that's when the smell hit me. A metallic sweetness, sharp and nauseating, that clawed at my throat. It was the smell of copper, like blood left soaking in water for too long. Industrial rot mixed with something organic. That sickening scent filled the air, wrapping around every sense I had. That thing stayed perfectly still. It made no sound when it moved, no crack of twigs, no rustle of leaves. But its body had started to shift. Its legs bent the wrong way at the joints, forming impossible angles. In my panic, I slammed into the side of the truck, fumbling for the keys. I dropped them once, hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, the sound tore through the silence of the woods like a gunshot. That noise, maybe it broke its focus, because when I looked again, it was standing at the edge of the clearing, its head tilted in that same unnatural way, its mouth opening and closing in slow, silent gulps, as if it were trying to imitate something living, trying to remember how to be alive. I slammed my foot down on the gas. Mud exploded behind the tires, the wheels screaming as they fought for traction. For the first 100 meters, I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I just drove, pure instinct, dodging ruts, fighting to keep control. When I finally did look back, I wished to God I hadn't. It was running, but no longer upright. It moved on all fours, its joints bending and snapping in ways that defied reason, a spider made of bone and sinew, jerking forward in bursts of impossible speed. It was closing the distance far too quickly, not fast enough to catch the truck, but not slow enough to be left behind. Mud splattered across its slick, gray body, but it didn't blink. Its movements mocked physics itself, a violent rejection of nature. And then, just as I reached the final bend before the gate, it stopped. It stood in the middle of the road again, rising back up on two legs, arching its spine into a grotesque question mark. Its head tilted left, then right, slowly, curiously, as if it were memorizing me and the sound of my truck. Even after the trees swallowed it, I swear those hollow black sockets were still burning through the rearview mirror. I didn't breathe right again until I hit pavement, 20 minutes later. The sound of rubber scraping asphalt was the only comfort I had left. My boots were still coated in that thick, oily mud, and that sickly, metallic sweetness had seeped deep into the driver's seat. No matter how much I cleaned, I could still smell it. I logged the outage as resolved. I never told anyone what I saw. If I had, they'd have called me crazy, or worse, sent a safety supervisor to go back there with me to inspect the site. But Pole 117, it's still on my maintenance route. And every time that area comes up, I trade shifts. Because I know what I saw, and it wasn't a fallen tree. It was something I never want to see again. My father owned an old hunting cabin, tucked deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. And when I say deep, I mean really deep. The kind of place where civilization simply stops. No cell service, no neighbors, nothing but rolling mountains and endless forests stretching out in every direction. The cabin was built by my great-grandfather, and for decades, it had been our family's go-to spot every deer season. But that particular winter, it had sat empty for months. Right before one of the biggest snowstorms was forecast to hit the region, my dad asked me to go up there with him, just to check on things. He wanted to grab a few supplies he'd left behind, and more importantly, make sure the roof hadn't taken any damage. Honestly, I didn't say no. Growing up, those trips into the woods with my father were some of the best memories I had. Just the two of us, and the forest. Back then, everything felt like an adventure. But when you grow up, and you go back, it doesn't feel the same anymore. The mountains seem bigger, and the silence heavier. It's not a peaceful quiet, but something else. Something almost alive. It feels like the forest itself is holding its breath, watching you. You start to realize just how small and fragile you really are. Like a single flicker of light standing on the edge of a world where human rules don't apply. This is the land of old legends, a place where the stories never really die. We left in the late afternoon. I tried to talk my dad out of it, told him it wasn't a great idea. But he just waved me off. "We'll be there before dark, Ward," he said. I still remember that line clearly. We'll be there before dark. I did most of the driving. With every mile, it felt like we were peeling away the layers of the modern world. First, the gas stations disappeared. Then the houses. And finally, even the power lines were gone. Just us, and the winding road cutting through an endless wall of trees. When the pavement finally gave way to muddy dirt, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The headlights cut through the dark, shining only on bare tree trunks and patches of old snow clinging to the ground like mold. "Maybe we should head back and come in the morning?" I suggested. My dad shook his head. "Better to get it done now," he said. That road, it barely qualified as a road anymore. Frozen ruts, deep enough to swallow a tire, potholes the size of craters, and dry, brittle branches clawing at the truck's sides like fingers. I had to crawl along at a snail's pace, doing everything I could to keep the truck steady. The darkness outside pressed in from all sides, and the focus it took just to keep moving created this awful, suffocating tension inside the cab. The tension had been building slowly, and then it broke. Right at that moment, something darted across the headlights. It moved on all fours, but every instinct in me screamed, that wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. Its body was too long, its limbs impossibly thin. Nothing about it looked natural. It didn't leap or sprint like a startled animal. It glided, low to the ground, like it had been poured from one side of the road to the other. It made no sound, just a dark, shifting shape that slipped back into the woods and was gone. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my knuckles bone white against the steering wheel. My father didn't turn his head. "Probably nothing," he said softly. "Just keep driving." But his voice, it was too calm, too controlled. It didn't match what we'd just seen. He was lying. And that calmness, that fake calmness, was somehow worse than what had crossed our path. He knew, or at least he suspected. In Appalachia, stories have always floated around about tall, gaunt creatures wandering the hills. They call them crawlers, or sometimes Wendigo. And I had this sinking feeling that I'd just met one. When we finally pulled into the clearing, the cabin looked smaller than I remembered, shrinking beneath the weight of the trees, like it was trying to hide. I killed the engine, and the silence hit us instantly. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with peace. It was heavy, almost physical. No wind, no insects, not even the whisper of movement, just a crushing stillness pressing in from every direction. A silence that knew something was out there. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust. The same rickety table, the cold stone fireplace, 2 bunk beds squeezed into the corner. I got a fire going while my father did a quick check around the property. When he came back in, the first thing he did made my stomach tighten. He locked the door, firmly, deliberately. Expecting company, I tried to joke, but my voice cracked halfway through. He didn't laugh, didn't even look at me. He just muttered, "Can't be too careful," and dropped into the chair beside the fire. We ate dinner in near silence, canned chili, warmed over the flame. The only sounds were the faint pop of burning wood and the soft clink of metal spoons against tin bowls. But in my head, I kept replaying what I'd seen on that road. The way it moved, those long, unnatural limbs, that impossible speed. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light, maybe exhaustion. Maybe my brain filling in shapes where there were none. It had to be. But then it happened. A scratching sound along the outside wall. Not the creak of old wood, not the moan of wind. This was deliberate, slow, sharp. Claws, dragging across the logs, testing them, digging in, moving closer. From the back of the cabin, toward the front door, my father froze. The spoon hung in midair, his eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Pure, unfiltered fear. We both held our breath, listening, as that horrible scratching sound kept creeping closer and closer. For a moment, my father froze, completely still. Then, slowly, he set his spoon down and stood up without saying a word. He reached for his hunting rifle. My heartbeat thundered so violently, it drowned out everything else, everything except that scratching sound, still creeping closer. Without warning, my father yanked the door open. The flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness like a blade. Nothing. Just the truck, glazed with frost, and the suffocating blackness of the woods beyond. "Stay here," he said. His voice was low, hard as stones. I wanted to beg him, "Don't go out there, Dad." But my throat locked up. No sound came out. He stepped off the porch, his boots crunching softly against the thin layer of snow. The beam of light swept across the clearing, cutting between the pale streaks of white scattered across the ground, then vanished behind the corner of the cabin. A few seconds later, I heard him curse, low, sharp, and filled with fear. When he came back, his face was pale, so tense it looked carved from ice. "Pack up, right now." "What? Why?" I stammered. "Do what I say." The way he shouted, desperate, commanding, sent my body into motion before my mind could catch up. I stuffed everything into my bag, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight twice. That's when I saw them, through the small frosted window. The tracks. They weren't boot prints, not paw prints, not anything I'd ever seen before. Long, narrow impressions, spaced too far apart to belong to any normal creature, as if something had crawled on hands and feet, its body stretched unnaturally long. The fingers, or whatever made them, had gouged deep trenches into the snow. It looked like something heavy, Something alive had dragged itself across the ground, scraping and tearing through the ice. It was the kind of sight you'd expect to see in a nightmare illustration, not in real life. We didn't speak a single word as we loaded the truck. My father kept the rifle raised, eyes darting from the tree line to the roof. I climbed into the driver's seat, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The moment the engine roared to life, something moved in the dark. I saw it, just for an instant, but that was enough. Low and fast, it wove between the trees, keeping pace with us as we pulled away. I gripped the door handle like it was the only thing holding me together. Every time the headlights flashed across an opening, I swore I saw it again. Those long arms swinging too low, that bent, crooked frame, its head hanging forward. It didn't run. It glided, silent, effortless, like a shadow that refused to let us go. The dirt road felt endless. Every jolt, every bump made me flinch. Once, I glanced into the rearview mirror, and under the faint red glow of the taillights, I saw it again, crouched at the edge of the road, completely still, like it had given up, or worse, like it was waiting. We didn't breathe until the dirt road ended and the truck's tires hit pavement. Even then, my father didn't slow down. Miles later, when the first flicker of town lights appeared through the trees, he finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence that had smothered us. "That wasn't an animal," he said. His voice was hollow, like those words had drained what was left of his strength. He didn't look at me, didn't say another word for the rest of the drive home, and we never, ever went back to that cabin again.